paying for submissions. Is it okay? Is it immoral? Is it fine in certain contexts? What about if you have funding? By submissions, I mean submissions for poetry publishing. For everything else, I recommend Kink Talk. Seriously though, I have gone down a rabbit hole. Hey there poetry pals, welcome back to another video. This week we are talking about paying for poetry publishing submissions and when that's okay. In this context, I will not be talking about self-publishing or vanity publishers. I feel like that's a slightly different issue. So if you're here for that, subscribe anyway, because I will be making a video about that at some point, but not today. What I'm focusing on today is you paying to submit your poetry, poems or poetry collection, and paying for an editor to read it, and that editor then decides whether they're going to publish your work. What you're paying for is for your work to get in front of that editor's eyeballs. This video is part of my Get Published series, so I will link in the description and maybe pop something up here. So if you want to learn more about publishing your poetry, you should check out those videos as well. In this video, I'll be looking at Anaxagorou's tweets when he popped off on Twitter about people charging for submissions a couple of weeks ago. Then I'll be talking about the different contexts in which you can submit your poetry for publication. And I'll be running through what I think about paying for those different contexts as well. I'll also be sharing what my followers think on social media. Speaking of followers, subscribe to my channel, follow me on all the socials. I am at Josie Alford Poet on all the things. Ding! So, first up, let's talk about Anaxagorou's tweets. On the 28th of September, Anthony tweeted, "I don't know man, if you're getting 100k from ACE," which means Arts Council England, for those of you who don't know, if you're getting 100k from ACE as a poetry publisher and still charging poets a submissions fee to put value on time and energy, you should probably need to revise your business model. It was not without its controversial hot take opinions. Anthony Anaxagorou is a poet and he's a real interesting one because he definitely came up in the spoken word scene, but he also has a lot of clout in the poetry publishing scene. He's got a few book collections out and he's been published in stuff like The Poetry Review and other stuff. He's an incredible poet. I definitely recommend you check him out. And also, oh, if you can hear the rain, just, you're welcome. I love rain noises, so yeah. But also he is like the co-founder, or he helps run, or he does run. I don't know whether it's just him or there's other people involved, but he is part of Outspoken Press, which is a small independent poetry press that definitely specialises in more spoken wordy people, and their books are aesthetic, so definitely check them out. But the reason I'm sharing all of this is that he's definitely coming from someone who, with knowledge of the poetry industry, both as a poet but also as an editor as well. So Jane Kermain, the editor of Nine Arches Press, replies saying, "Anthony, I've got a lot of respect for you, but would this have been better as an email to that publisher to open a dialogue rather than a subtweet that potentially could cast an aspersion and be seriously rather damaging to this indie press without its full context?" To be fair, Anthony did not tag the press he is talking about, but don't worry, I worked out who it is and I'll be telling you in a bit. If this is about the press and publisher I think it is, they are one of the hardest working people I know and one of the few women of colour editors in poetry. Does your tweet seem to unfairly suggest that they are profiteering / mismanaging and questioning their business model? And goes on, "Personally, I'm not in favour of charging submissions, but if a small indie press decides to offer a pay what you can model with the £0 option, then that isn't a huge deal. And your tweet doesn't fully mention this is optional, so perhaps clarify or reconsider this tweet." Anthony then replies, "Perhaps you're right. I mean, I just find it all a bit odd that such a substantial amount of funding requires people to pay, even if the option to submit for free is also being offered. Why? All of this information is on the publisher's website, so it's not really some big expose. Jane replies, I get that, but all worth looking at that particular funding stream. I get that, but worth looking at that particular funding stream, not just the headline money. It is given for more than 1 year's work, supports growth and development of skills and strategic capabilities of diverse organisations. I just think this tweet frames this is unfair and inaccurate. Anthony replies, I know what it's for. I read the bookseller article too. I also have run an indie press since 2012 and I'm acutely aware how these things work. Asking poets to pay or not pay just seems really weird to me when you've been awarded 100k, that's all I'm saying. Jane replies, maybe it could have been raised as an email first then, to ask and maybe see if it seems a bit unfair or if this conversation had to be around those concerns. Lots of respect for you, Anthony, but I just feel a bit uncomfortable with this and I wanted to share that. So I saw this discussion and decided to have a quick Goog. And I found the bookseller article that was mentioned in there, and I will link it in the description below. The publisher in question is the Emma Press, and they were awarded almost £100,000 as part of a programme to diversify the arts and cultural sector. This was awarded by Arts Council England. The latest funding round of the Elevate scheme aims to specifically address the underrepresentation of people with disabilities and those from BAME backgrounds across the sector. I went on their website and the Emma Press's submission window has just closed. But I was able to find out their submission rules, and it says that number one, in order to go through and submit your poetry collection to them, you have to buy a submission fee. This costs £0 to £20 and will go towards Emma and the team's time reading the submissions. Make a note of your order number, the one starting with a hash, as you'll need it later. Submissions are limited to one per person per window. During their submission window, they do ask people to pay a submission fee with a sliding scale of cost. I did want to go in and try and buy a submission fee just to see how it worked and whether it was a sliding thing of pay what you decide, or whether it was select 0, 5, 10, 15. I'm not sure what the mechanism is because their submission window had closed by the time I was able to get on their website. What follows is my opinions. Those are the facts, and I will link to the various places in the description. But what follows now are my opinions on the subject. Honestly, it doesn't bother me that the Emma Press are charging for submissions. A lot of small indie presses do that, so it's not actually that unusual. Although charging up to £20 seems a little bit much. I don't £20 seems like a lot. I'm just gonna say it. The funding that they're talking about is specifically towards going to developing themselves as an organisation and encouraging diversity within the publishing space, which is something that I think is very important and would have avoided other issues within the publishing space. And if what Jane says is right, and the Elevate programme is designed to be funding for more than 1 year, and Emma has says in the bookseller article that she's looking to hire 2 new people, if those are 2 new members of staff that are full-time and working for the Emma Press, that 100k runs out real quick when you're paying someone a fair wage to do what she wants. Now, chances are, they're part-time, so it goes a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there, maybe some money to make their website fully accessible, for screen readers and stuff like that. All of those things cost a lot of money, and it's all good and should be done, but it's expensive for that to happen. So I can understand why that 100k that's dedicated to making the publishing space more diverse is focused on other things. Having said that, yes, charging £20 for a submission is a lot, but they do have a pay what you can scale. So yeah, I don't think it's a big deal. Do I think Anthony was wrong to tweet that? No, I don't. I think that everyone is entitled to their opinion, and it's easy to like read that article and still be like, especially the fact that you're charging up to £20, and be like, well, that's odd. And as he is someone who's run an indie press, Outspoken, check him out, he can, you know, he understands how it works and how that business model and everything like that. I think Anthony's entitled to an opinion. I think he's entitled to tweet about that. I think subtweeting it and not tagging the original publisher in it is fine. I don't think you have to like tag everyone in it and stuff like that. And also, like, as Jane says, she was worried about what the outcome might be on the Emma press, on this small indie press. But he didn't tag them, so like, what's the problem? And finally, I think Jane had every right to like call him out and say that. And I think that the discussion they had was really civil. As a result of that initial discussion, a lot of people got really funny with Anthony because the Outspoken Press Awards, which he is a part of, charges for entry. And he goes on to say, people saying that Outspoken charges a fee to enter the prize, so now I'm a hypocrite. The prize works this way. A prize works this way. You ask people to submit for a fee. If they win, they get a bigger amount, which is not quite the same as being given the option to pay to have a manuscript read by a publisher. Something I agree with. We also have several external judges who are paid for their time and expertise, with any additional income covering venue hire, etc. None of our team are paid for making up the long list, which brings in over 800 submissions and takes weeks to read through. The idea with Outspoken Live / Outspoken Press / the masterclasses and annual competition was that we offered spaces and platforms to poets who were previously ignored or marginalised, and we started doing that in 2012. The remit 9 years later is still very much the same. There's a lot of misdirected frustration and anger from certain people on here who've been accusing me of all kind of weird and dishonest things over the last 24 hours. If we can't have open discussions about publishing without everything turning into a scandal, then what? I've explained several times how a tweet questioning the idea of asking poets to pay or not to pay to have their submissions read seems odd. Others have now clarified why that might need to happen, and that's it. We've had our discussion, now let's carry on with our little lives. He makes a good point here. I think that prizes are different, and it is a lot more normal for people to pay to submit to a prize because the prizes have prizes and we're paying for judges and stuff like that. And as he said, he doesn't pay the team, the Outspoken team who create the long list. And the Outspoken prizes have a fuckload of prizes. There's like videos, there's written stuff, there's collections. So I'm not surprised, like 800 submissions, there's a lot. So this question of like prizes and then submitting collections is all very interesting. So for the next part of the video, I'm just going to run through the different publishing contexts and whether I think you should pay or not pay for them. First of all, you've got individual poems going in magazines, journals, that sort of thing. I've actually made a video on like submission spreadsheets and submitting individual poems and how to submit that, and you should watch those videos. But in this context, I'm talking about magazines, journals, online blogs, that sort of thing, where they will publish a small number of your poems for their audience. It is not an entire collection. Personally, this seems really dodgy to me, and I don't like to pay for this sort of thing. The way the business model of a magazine tends to work, it's slightly different for online, and I'm not really sure about that, so I'm not going to pretend that I know. But for print magazines, a lot of their income will come from subscriptions. And so asking people to pay for submit is a bit dodge. Personally, I wouldn't pay for this. I think that you should be making money off your subscriptions or finding funding for that. In terms of examples of people that do charge, I would just say just go on Submittable and like, they're there. I always just, when I'm looking for magazines and journals to submit to, I always just make sure I click the free version, because there's no way that I'm paying to submit my poems to be in magazines that I have to pay for. However, a good example of this is Bath Mag. They do not charge for submissions, and they also pay you money if your poems are accepted. So for Bath Mag, I will link them in the description. Ultimately, it's up to you whether you want to pay for this. You know the whole like exposure doesn't pay the bills? Well, don't pay for exposure then. Don't do that. There are plenty of magazines that do not charge for submissions, so just stick to them instead. So then we have the competition, which is something that Anthony mentioned with the Outspoken Prize. It is far more normal to pay for competitions. The money goes towards the prize fund and also pays for judges' times. Although, as Anthony mentioned, oftentimes it will be the team that bring it down to the long list, and then the judges will judge from the long list. So some famous examples are the National Poetry Prize, which charges £7 per poem and £4 for any subsequent poems. It is cheaper for Poetry Society members, but you have to pay to be a Poetry Society member. So the Bridport Prize, another famous prize in the UK, charges £10. One thing to say here is that is not an insignificant amount of money for some people. When I was doing my masters, I actually set myself a budget for submission fees that I would be like, okay, well, this is how much I'm willing to pay. But now, personally, I'm like, no, I would rather not spend my hard-earned money submitting for competitions. Although I might do for this next one, because I've got another example, which is the Button Poetry Video Competition. When they charge $8 for US residents and $6 for international poets, and you submit a video, and if you're like shortlisted or whatever, there's like a prize, and they share your video on Button Poetry. But as I said, these entrance fees can make competitions exclusionary. That not everyone can afford to drop £5 to £10 or more on competitions. Even if you know who the judges are, you don't know what they're going to resonate with on a certain day. Although, like, you know, there are certain prizes that will say this is what they're looking for. Maybe there's some themed stuff, so you might have a stronger idea. But especially for stuff like the National Poetry Prize or the Bridport Prize, other than like general trends in poetry, and most of the time the National Prize is what sets the trends rather than what follows the trends, you don't know what's going to do well, so it is essentially gambling. And the advice I've always stuck to when it comes to gambling, I don't gamble, is only gamble what you can afford to lose. So like, if you've got a tenner in your pocket and you're quite happy to just set fire to it, then by all means spend a tenner submitting to the Bridport Prize. But if you can't afford to lose a tenner, don't do that. Which is why competitions can be exclusionary for people. I'm sure there are free competitions out there though, you just have to go out and find them. As I said in other publishing videos, the Angela T. Carr website is full of loads of useful submission windows and stuff like that. I will link that in the description. The price of competition entry might be higher if you're entering a publication competition. So like a collection competition. I think the most I've ever spent in a competition was like 20 quid. Maybe more for the new prize in poetry thing. I'm just gonna make the logo pop up now, but it was for like a pamphlet competition. Yeah, new poetry pamphlet competition. I didn't get it. Personally, I could have used that 20 quid to, I don't know, have a bev, but that's another example as well, is the price will go up if it's for a collection. Then finally, we've got the collection or pamphlet publication stuff. So these are not individual poems, it's not a competition, we're talking about getting yourself a book. Most publishers don't charge for a submission, but if it's a small indie press, you might find a few of them will charge. Especially if they've only got 1 or 2 reading submissions, and people get a lot of submissions, so it can take a lot of time for them to read it, and if they are a small and indie press, maybe they don't have the money to pay that person to read it, so submission fees are a good way of doing it. Personally, I am less bothered about people charging for this, although if it's over a £5, I do think it's weird. As I said earlier, Emma Press are charging up to £20, which seems like quite a lot to me. Burning Eye Books, I have interviewed Bridget from Burning Eye Books, you can watch the video. They charge £5, but there's literally just 2 of them reading all of their submissions. And so charging a £5 is a way to make sure that the people submitting are serious and that they're not just sort of like carpet bombing their manuscript. Ugh. The £5 is to make sure that people submitting are serious about submitting to them specifically, and that they're not just carpet bombing their manuscript to every publisher with an open submission window. Another point to say here is I'm pretty sure prose writers don't have to pay to submit. This isn't even a thing. But then prose writers have bloody agents who will do this. Bloody prose writers. I mean, part of that is because there is just more money in prose publishing anyway, so So personally, I feel like I should admit I have paid for submission of a poetry collection to a publisher, but I would not be willing to spend more than a £5. As I said, with any other context here, it's up to you and what you're willing to spend for it. If the publisher is right for you, which is more of the question really, is do you love this publisher? Can you see your work amongst their stuff? Do you think that you'd be a good fit for them? Are they a good fit for you? Once you've answered all of those questions, then it's up to you to decide whether it's worth paying. I asked my subscribers and my social media followers what they thought. Hit subscribe and follow me at Josie Alford Poet. I think it's fair to ask for a pay what you can donation, while also making it clear that they don't want this to be a barrier for anyone. We're all passing that hat around and supporting each other when we can, and editors should be paid for their work, but I'd be wary of putting walls up. The audience and granting institutions aren't able to keep poetry journals going anymore. I've seen some offer free submissions while offering little perks like a crit for paid submissions. I think this is a really good model maybe. If the audience and the funding grantors and stuff like that aren't able to support a poetry journal, then yeah, definitely offering free submissions, but offering a little something extra, like some feedback if you pay. Sounds good to me. The big prizes that ask you to enter do feel like a complete gamble, not gonna lie. I don't really look at journals that ask for payment to more submissions. I'm happy to buy a copy that's had my work published in it though. So maybe that's what it is once someone has been accepted, maybe you just don't give them the free copy, but to be honest, I want my free copy. Susanna Evans, who is a poet and editor and has mentored me in the past, I've also reviewed her poetry book on this channel, you can watch that, says, in this day of tiny arts organisations which are continually asked to prove their sustainability and resilience, doesn't like that word, by ACE to receive funding, a subs fee is also a way of achieving that. Paying it is a vote of confidence for that publisher, a way of supporting their work and showing you have chosen them for a reason rather than random manuscript bombing. And there should always be a free option for those who genuinely can't afford it. She makes a good point here, and so let me explain a little bit. Arts Council England has many different ways that you can apply for funding, whether you're applying as an individual or whether you're applying for an organisation. And when you're applying as an organisation, you need to supply evidence that you're worth funding because people are already invested in you, that you have resilience and that you have partners that are willing to work with you. So if you can show, yeah, look, people are willing to pay money to be seen by our arts organisation, like people are willing to pay money to be read by our editors because people love our poetry press that well. So you funding us is going to be a good thing for the UK poetry scene. So it's kind of like chicken and egg sort of situation sometimes. So in conclusion, I think charging to submit is okay, but only in certain contexts, and should be kept as affordable as possible. I think that in every context there should be a pay what you can option, but also maybe a funding solution as well is a pay it forward option. So those of the poets with the dollar can pay it forward so that other people who can't afford it can afford to do it whilst also maintaining the publisher in question. I do not think it's okay to charge for submissions for individual poems in publications such as magazines and journals. It's a hard no from me. But ultimately, I think it is up to the individual poet to decide what they are willing to pay for and what they aren't, but also what they can pay for and what they can't. Unfortunately, these funding fees are a barrier to some people. So one thing that we can do as an industry is remove those barriers as much as possible. By all means, charge a fee, but make it optional or allow people to pay it forward. One final thing that I didn't really say here, and it's kind of an important point, so hi, I'm editing Josie, is that it's problematic to continue to support people who are charging for submissions because by supporting that as a business model, you are kind of condoning it. And so by giving that your money, more and more publishers are going to think that that is an okay option, and it will become less affordable for people who can't afford it. So what we should do is only really support the publishers with our money as poets who are looking to get published. We should only support the ones who make it affordable options as well. And if those affordable options don't exist, then maybe we shouldn't be giving our money to them because they're not being as accessible as they could be. I hope that makes sense. So what do you guys think? Do you think it's okay for people to charge for submission when there's no guarantee of publication? Yes? No? Why? Why not? Let me know in the comments down below. So that's it for this week's video. I hope you found it useful. This video is part of my Get Published series. Make sure you follow that playlist if you're interested in publishing your own poems. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications for weekly videos about all things poetry. And it really helps small creators like me get found, so help a girl out. You can support the channel by joining me on Patreon or buying me a coffee or following me on social media. I am at Josie Ilford Poet on all the things. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all next week. Bye.